I think one of the hardest lessons to learn as a DM is that sometimes the story you want to tell is not the best story that could be told. I know that was difficult for me. I thought I had it figured out, that this was going to be a great story, that these were the points that were going to happen, and this is what was going to go down, and it was going to be a really interesting and, climactic ending. But that's not what D&D is about. If you want to tell an interesting story where the characters do everything exactly as you want, write a book, write a novel, write a script, a screenplay, something else. Because spoilers, your players are almost always going to do other things. But I'm not talking about how to cope with the fact that your players are going to make choices that you don't expect and how to improv off of that. Instead, I want to talk about something else. The third thing that affects your stories. Dice. See, if it was only about us telling stories with our friends, what's the point of dice? Why would they even be there? Why would we even need them if all we're doing is improvising with people we enjoy being around? Dice are there for randomness, for things to go a certain way that we don't expect, for things to happen despite the fact we want them to happen another way. And I'm here to talk about why sometimes the dice are better storytellers than us. I want to talk about two campaigns, two separate ones that both actually wrapped up and finished. It wasn't just the fact that there was a TPK or that people just had lives. These campaigns ended. And so I think these stories bring up a much more interesting thing because I can talk about the ramifications of those die rolls. So for the first story, it was back when I was in college. I was running my second campaign I had ever run. It was with a bunch of other people who knew about D&D, maybe played 1 or 2 sessions before then, and then one guy, Mike, who was a power gamer. I learned very quickly about that. At this point in the story, though, we had a core group of about 4 or 5 adventurers who were going to be there every week and were participating and enjoying the sessions. At this point in the story, they had escaped a nation that enslaved people in order to work in their mines to produce a bunch of resources for them. The party was former slaves, escaped, got their own boat, and started to gather resources to take down the nation. So they start gathering people, they go to a few different places, ask for their help, find some other allies, get things from here and there. In one instance, one of the players decided, hey, I want to bring in my elf family from my background and have them fight with us. Now it's important to note, this character, Sol K, wasn't an elf. He was a half-orc. Now the reason for that was he actually already had this character made for a previous campaign, brought him in, and I was like, we got a lot of elves already, man. Can you do something else? And he decided, sure, I'll play a half-orc, but kept everything else the same. So instead of him just being a normal Legolas wannabe, he's now this half-orc that was abandoned by his family and raised by elves. And they didn't treat him any different than, like, anyone else, which, like, I think is usually the default we go to, right? The Tarzan situation. So they were actually more than willing to help him. But they also started to notice that he was worshiping a different god. Earlier in the campaign, they had come across this guy known as the Shadow Hunter, who could manipulate and use magic to do whatever he wanted. The party fought him for a few rounds, were never able to hit him until about the 6th round, where someone finally hit him and he decided to disappear. The player was like, hey, those are really cool. Can I do some of that stuff? I'm like, yeah, sure, we can talk about that. It's going to be about following this god, doing these rituals, getting all of these things, and he was totally down for it. So as the campaign went on, he started to get some of these powers, found his elf troop, decided to convince them to join them in the fight. They took on the nation and won. Other stuff happened there, obviously, but that's not what's important for what we're about to get to. See, during the fight with the nation, that's when the elves started to notice he's doing shadow magic. He's doing special magic that we don't allow. And once more, this magic clearly belongs to a different god than the one we worship. So his brother, his adopted brother, decides to approach him and say, hey, what's up? And they have a conversation back and forth. Now, it's also important to note that Sol K did not have good charisma. I think it was like a -2. And so, as they have a conversation back and forth, they're talking here and there, he's trying to convince them that no, he's not worshiping another god. He actually cares about Eldorian, the Elven Lord. He doesn't want to focus on another one. And I'm like, you're clearly lying. Roll bluff. So he rolls. And it was like a 2. And so the conversation continues. And he continues to try to convince his family. At this point, I could also see that I was starting to get a little agitated on the player himself, the actual person there. He was upset. He wanted his elves to still be his family. He created this backstory where elves supported him despite the fact that he was a half-orc. He didn't want to give that up. So I had him roll again. Persuasion. See if you can convince them. He got a nat 3, which made it a 1. The elves were not listening to him at this point, and he was getting more and more frustrated. How could this game, where it's about fulfilling your fantasies, fulfilling what you want to do and all these interesting things, how could that be taken away from him? And then finally, I have him roll one more time. I have him roll just one final roll. In my head, he had to pull a miracle, basically a natural 20. He rolled a 2, which made it a 0. In that moment, I decided the elves abandoned him. He had gone too far. He clearly was trying to hide it, which to them was worse than just coming forward with it and admitting that that's what was happening. So they left. The player got so angry, he threw the die across the room, and he was just frustrated and angry and so mad. And who would it be? He created this interesting backstory, and the dice were telling him, no, that's done. You don't need that anymore. And as the story progressed, he decided, okay, if my elven family's abandoning me, I'm going hard into this shadow magic. And it created much more interesting opportunities for him later on in the campaign. He ended up fighting the Shadow Hunter again, and trust me, that in and of itself is an interesting story I might get into in a later date. But that was one of those moments where as a player, he wanted a specific outcome, and the dice said, no, this outcome's better. And they were. Now for the second story, this is a few years later. I've moved back home after college, and this is about how I, as a DM, had to learn that the dice are better at telling stories. So this is the first and so far only campaign where I had characters go from level 1 to 20. Lasted over 3 years, very fun. And despite having a bunch of players come in and drop out throughout the 3 years, 3 of them were there from the entire time. One of them died pretty early on, which I might make a video about how I actually do feel that every party should lose a party member before level 5. But the other 2 characters, Faye and Bahir, kept moving on, kept going forward. And so the story became a little bit more about those 2. I eventually decided I want to run Curse of Strahd, but I don't want to do a brand new campaign for it. So I'm just going to run Curse of Strahd in the middle of this campaign. It's going to be the condensed version. I'm going to use unique rules that I made up for it. So the party go into Barovia, they do all the Strahd things, and end up going to Strahd's house. And in the foyer of the entrance, they fought him. He eventually disappeared and got away because that's the point of Strahd, is that you never really can kill him. Well, it's also important to know that Strahd had a noble, Madame Acosta, who was basically like a female Frankenstein. She had patchwork faced herself because she thought that she would have the prettiest parts of certain individuals sewn onto her face. And she was also a wizard. Got to do a lot of cool things, summoned a bunch of golems, flesh, blood, bone golems to help her out. Well, in my head, I decided she's a wizard. She'd probably have access to the clone spell. In fact, maybe that's why she has the patchwork face. See, I started with the imagery of the patchwork face, and then eventually came to the idea of, wait, if she has a clone, then what her face looks like there will actually be perfect and no scars or seams in her new clone body. So that's what I went with. The idea that she would probably have a secret clone hidden somewhere in the mansion because it's the most fortified place in all of Barovia. Now Strahd would probably be okay with this as long as he got to have a clone of himself as well. And then I started thinking maybe Strahd should have more clones, like a whole bunch. So I made a cellar where there was going to be a bunch of different Strahd clones, but in the attic, hidden behind an invisible secret staircase, was going to be the clone of Madame Acosta and Strahd. So when the party eventually killed them and made it seem like, yay, we finally defeated them, we're good, the 2 of them would emerge in their clone bodies and leave. I would then eventually have Madame Acosta come back a few levels later and attack the party out of nowhere, thinking that they killed her, only for it to have her show up. And then the main bad guy was going to show up as well, and a lot of things were going to happen. Well, the party started exploring Castle Ravenloft, and they got to the point where there would be the secret staircase. And I was like, I want to be fair. They might have a chance of finding it. So I rolled percentile dice to see, would any of them hit the secret staircase? And I rolled, and I was like, okay, I mean, the dice rolled yes. Now let me roll to see which one of them got it. It landed on Bahir. Mind you, Bahir is a monk. High wisdom, high dexterity. So I had him roll to make a dexterity check. And I'm like, okay, good news is, probably avoid it. Nothing will happen. He actually hit it. He hit the staircase. So I had to explain to him how he felt like he hit his foot on nothing. And he's like, that's weird. Let me look around. Rolls a perception check. Finds the staircase. Goes up into the attic. And they see an undead beholder. It's just a zombie beholder. It's not that difficult. But I was hoping that would scare them. The entire campaign, there was a few times they were going to fight beholders and just ran away. So I was hoping maybe a zombie beholder would scare them a little bit. No, they killed it really quickly. And in investigating the attic, they found the clone body of Madame Acosta and a clone body of Strahd. And they were like, well, crap. Things are going to get serious. They were wise enough to destroy the clone bodies, which took no effort because they were just basically unmoving, sleeping bodies at that point. And then they moved on to the cellar where they knew Strahd was hiding. And as they start fighting Strahd, they see more coffins. Coffins similar to the one that Strahd's clone was in. And so they start fighting Strahd, they start fighting Madame Acosta and a few other individuals to make it, you know, more interesting than just a 2-on-5 battle. And the druid Fae, knowing that these coffins might hold extra clones, decided, I'm going to become a fire elemental and just walk over all the caskets, setting them afire. So what was going to be a fun game of like Pop Goes the Weasel with a new Strahd coming out of a random casket and them not knowing which ones were which became them burning them down very quickly. And I got to have this really fun moment where despite Madame Acosta getting hurt, her having this smile like, oh, you're not really killing me. And Bahir noticing that smile and being like, oh, but you are going to die. Now, as it progressed, they were able to kill Strahd and Madame Acosta, and both of those characters were dead. I had no other clones planned for them, and I didn't feel like retroactively making other clones. Just for that moment in my head that I thought was going to be better. The way it played out was so much more satisfying to the players. I introduced a new spell with the clone spell, and they found out about it before the battle. So they knew going into the battle, hey, we can deal with Strahd before we have to deal with Strahd. It made them have this sense of, we outsmarted the DM, which kind of did. It was more just the die rolls. But I didn't want to take that away from them. I didn't want them to have this great moment of, we did something really awesome, we did something that the DM wasn't expecting, and just pull the rug out from under them. Why would it, like that isn't satisfying, that's not fair to them. And so if things had gone the way I wanted, it might have been cool and interesting as a surprise reveal, but the satisfaction and the payoff wouldn't have been nearly as interesting if I had gone the opposite direction of the dice. I know as a new DM, and even honestly as an old DM, there's times I want to flub dice because I think the story's going to be much more interesting if we go the direction I want it to go. But it's not. The fun thing about D&D is that the players get to make choices. And the dice determine what happens. I do encourage all of you, DMs, players, old, new, whatever you may be okay with the dice determining what happens. Because sometimes they tell a better story. So yeah, thank you so much for watching. I'm probably going to do a few more of these videos of just lessons I've learned from being a DM that people don't really talk about, or if they do, I haven't seen them. Obviously, if you enjoyed the video, please subscribe and like it. Let me know in the comments, would you be interested in me telling the story of one of my campaigns that actually completed? You know, just talking about the lessons I've learned and what was going on in my head. I always enjoy being able to peek behind the screen a little bit, so just let me know if you'd be interested in that. I might do it anyway, we'll see. But until then, thank you for watching my videos, and I hope to see you guys next time.